Hello, everybody. Welcome to Nothing Exempt. Today we have a fairly special episode. We have our guest host today. His name is Alex Kapp. He is a pianist, a musician, and on the side, he is a host of the podcast LA Survival Guide, a podcast that is entertaining for millennials and confusing for everybody else. just, just a little humor there. Anyways, Alex, welcome to the show. Uh, why don't you tell us and all the listeners what you do during the day?
Sure. Thanks, Brian. And I appreciate you guys for inviting me on your show. So, I am a composer and a pianist, as Brian mentioned. And at the moment, I am actually teaching remote piano lessons during the day or in the afternoon and evening. And during the mornings, I usually work on my own projects, my own composing projects. Like right now, I am scoring a short film and a few small video games.
Well, that's pretty interesting. What came first? Where did you get started in music? Were you a 5-year-old prodigy that played piano? Like, where did it all begin?
No prodigy here. Yeah. So it began probably around sophomore year of high school is the first time I actually realized I liked music and I liked playing piano. My parents had me start lessons at 5 years old. So I've always been playing, but it wasn't until then in high school that I was like, maybe I should do this for a career. And I started writing music on my own in middle school. And since then, I got more interested in writing for projects, writing for more multimedia projects, films and games and VR and whatnot. And so after I was almost done with college, I decided to go more that direction. I went to undergrad for classical piano, and I still do play piano here and there. But that kind of change in interest led me out here to Los Angeles, and where I am doing a little bit more of the multimedia composing thing, and then more recently started working on the podcast you mentioned earlier.
So, are you like any other musicians, and you have a studio, but you also have a mini grand piano in your studio?
I wish I had a mini grand piano. So my studio is basically my apartment, but it's a pretty nice setup, and it does everything I need it to do. And it's great to work from home and have everything you need there. So I don't actually need to, I can record here, I can compose, orchestrate everything. I can print sheet music if I need it for musicians, pretty much everything I need to do here.
Nick, you've been pretty quiet. I didn't know you hated music so much.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really a hardcore audiophile. I mean,
Oh
most of the
no,
music.
Nick, don't lie.
It's
Don't
okay.
lie.
We can't all be audiophiles.
What do you listen to when you turn music on, Nick?
Hardcore house music.
Yeah,
Nice.
nobody was expecting that. Nick, you can't say that you don't like music or you're not an audiophile or any of those things and then be really into techno or whatever you call your electronic music.
Hey,
Oh
I
yeah,
respect that.
yeah. It's well, the technical subgenre is either new disco or French house. If you want to get into specifics. Um,
That's
Wow.
that's so specific. I've never heard of it, and yet you're not an audiophile and you don't listen to music.
well, I mean, I listen to podcasts like this, but I guess the question I will have is, how long did it take you to get from not knowing how to play a piano to getting good?
Like, let's say to the point that you wrote your first piece of music. Like, what's that distance in time?
Well, I think those are two different questions. So if you just want to play piano, I think you can spend a couple years dedicated lessons and practicing every day, and you'll be able to play some intermediate kind of repertoire. And it's piano is one of those instruments where it's easy to learn, hard to master. So it's pretty basic, it's just push the right key at the right time, but it can get really complicated really fast. But intermediate repertoire is pretty accessible for people who just want to pick it up at really any point in their life. even as an adult, you can still go back, and as long as you have time, you can always learn. Writing music, well, you don't actually have to understand music theory to write music. Lots of people are self-taught, and some people don't know how to read music at all, and they're writing their own music. So you can really do that no matter your piano skill, but having a little bit more piano skill or skill on any instrument like guitar, something polyphonic, is going to make it a whole lot easier. Having access to anything, any program like GarageBand or Logic or whatever, that makes this whole world just a whole lot more accessible to people who are not as good musicians. There are a whole lot of tools there that you can use to compose that really don't require you to have, virtuoso piano chops. So it's a lot more accessible than it used to be.
I totally agree with you. I played music for a number of years, and when it was mechanical and read the music, hit the keys to the timing and practice, I could
Mm-hmm.
do it. I've probably lost all of that skill. It's been now like 15 years since I played, but I could do that. And then I got to the point where I was asked to try and compose my own music, and that's about the time I stopped. I just, I didn't, I went from being a mechanical thing to now it's creative. So I see it as two totally different things, but you made the jump. So at what point in your career from learning the piano to becoming a composer did you make that jump?
I think it started turning around middle school. So I started playing when I was 5. So middle school, that must be like, I don't know, around 12. So I guess after, I mean, it could be different for everybody, but I guess around 7 years of playing, I started getting interested in composing my own stuff. And then it grew more and more gradually.
Have you seen um, any kind of independent success where you weren't being paid to produce something and you went out and produced something on your own and then tried to sell it or just share it with the world?
Yeah, definitely. I do remember starting out basically doing almost everything for free and really not hoping to expect much out of it except just kind of building contacts and building a network. But eventually, I do have a good story. It may be a little bit long winded, but about how I basically got my first feature film gig. And what it really all boils down to is you never know where something is going to lead, and you never know when you're going to meet the right person who will introduce you to such and such later. And
I definitely think you're describing about 5
every
million
career,
people in LA.
yeah, yeah, every career ever can be summed up in those
But
kinds of
I,
words.
I definitely want to hear the story.
Sure, absolutely. So I started orchestrating for a composer on the East Coast for just freelancing for many years. I started in 2009, I want to say. I started just by playing piano for one of his concerts, and he discovered that I could do transcription and orchestration, and then basically I could make sheet music. So I would be making sheet music for the conductor and the orchestra and the musicians for his concerts. And as he trusted me over the years, he would give me more work. And then 10 years later, flash forward to LA, and I finished USC, and he gets an offer for a feature film that someone wants him to score. He's from Maine, and the film is Maine based. So the director is from Maine, and they shot it almost entirely in Maine. So they think he's the right choice, and he's really busy with his own projects. So he comes to me and he says, "You want to split this 50-50?" And first of all, that was a generous offer. He didn't have to do that. He could have said, "Can you help me score this? I'm not giving you credit." That would have been totally valid too, and I still would have jumped at it because I had never done a feature film before, scored a feature film before. And then he comes back to me like a week later and he's like, "I'm just too busy with all my other projects. I'm going to call the producer and just tell them, just go with Alex on the gig." And that's essentially how I got to score my first feature film. First feature film. Um, and it was kind of like a 10-year relationship in the making that kind of led to that. But it was pretty amazing to see kind of the lead up to that.
So, if for anyone listening, is this something we can go look you up on IMDb and see what people had to say about it? Listen to it ourselves?
Yes, you absolutely can. So the name of that film is called Holly Star. It is an indie Christmas rom-com. So if you're into that kind of thing,
I
it's
mean,
on
who
IM.
isn't?
Hmm?
Who isn't? Everybody's into that type of thing.
Right? Yeah, I know. So that is on Netflix as well. It came on Netflix November 2019. It initially came out in 2018 on iTunes and some other streaming platforms. And I mean, I have some more info on my website, but yeah, you can totally look that up on those platforms. And yeah, definitely check it out. Yeah,
But
I'm pretty proud of
what
it.
what kind of reaction did you get from people, and how did it feel like having your name out there? And I don't know if that was I guess that's the first feature film, but I don't know how often you've had that type of experience where you've had people, strangers, reach out to you to tell you about your work. Did you feel vindicated? Like, you feel like, what was it like?
Yeah, I did get a few people, a few random strangers reaching out. Some people who were just other composers and just really, just trying to support me and congratulate me and stuff like that. And generally, well, I did actually get to have a sort of private screening at my apartment, I think last year, and just invited a bunch of friends over and did a little impromptu Q&A. And I think one of the questions was like, what is the sound of Christmas? How do you make up that sound? And it's so interesting that that my first feature was a Christmas film, just because it has a certain, it's not like every typical Christmas film, but it does have a certain sound. And there's the sleigh bells and all that, and this certain type of electric guitar that comes in and makes that sound, but that kind of Christmassy sound. But yeah, um, it was, I really enjoyed being able to kind of share the process with people, and the opportunity of, well, for one, I got a chance to record. There's a big band at USC, the Thornton Jazz Orchestra, and I was able to convince the director that we need to record them for some. I made some big band arrangements of traditional Christmas tunes, and it really made a world of difference. And yeah, just really enjoyed being able to share like how that came to be, how it all got put together, and how just kind of the director's faith in what I would be able to do, even though I had never done a feature before. Just him believing in me, kind of allowing me the freedom to work with him on this. That was a good feeling to be able to be entrusted with that. It's over 60 minutes of music, so it's a pretty big project. So I appreciated that kind of trust.
That sounds like an amazing experience. Are you going to go after that type of work again as a kind of focus? Are you going to head off in other directions, or just see where the wind blows? And where do you think the industry's going, since nobody's working in COVID? And what do you think the future looks like because of what's going on in the world?
Yeah, as far as the work that I want to pursue next, all of the above. I am interested in a variety of projects. I like working on video games. I like working on films. I like working on VR experiences. So I just this is just geared towards my personality. I just enjoy working on a variety of things all at once, or across a different time span. As far as the sound of where the industry is heading, COVID aside, the tendency for scores these days is definitely to become more sound design oriented and less melodic. And melody, it's not yet completely a thing of the past, but it tends to kind of evoke sort of nostalgic and kind of um, almost like dated sounds. And the modern score is usually one that you can't walk out of the theater singing because you just felt it and you didn't actually know what it sounded like.
Why is that the case? Why is music shifting in that direction?
I think part of it is that directors are wanting, and they have, more control over how the score works in the film. It In the golden age of film scoring, the composer had a little bit more power, and they were able to say, here's the score to the film. See you later, and I'm going to go take my next gig." But as time went on, I think, and especially with technology now, directors have a little bit more control, and the technology that we use allows a lot more flexibility. And working with sample libraries, it gives you the freedom to make edits at any time. And whereas if you recorded a live orchestra, and if that was your only choice, you're really limited in terms of the kinds of changes that you can make afterwards. But now that we can put any sound anywhere and change it at almost any time in the process of scoring, it kind of opens up a new world of possibilities, that of almost like granular kind of approach. And what I think is happening is, I'm seeing this a lot in especially like the USC students I worked with, not all of them, but many of them. They're really afraid of, I shouldn't say afraid, this has a negative connotation, but they don't want the music to get in the way of the film, which totally makes sense. And what you really want to do, what your goal is for the listener to not get taken away from the film by the music trying to draw attention to itself, but for the music to kind of sit with the film and kind of ebb and flow and be part of it. And so I think that's kind of where the sound design shift comes in, is that it's not very invasive, but it can be really effective, and you can feel it, and it can really add to the film in similar ways that really highly melodic and highly orchestrated film scores can add to it.
So in moving in that same direction, musicians play music, maybe an instrument or 10 instruments. They tend to love music. Uh, does the work that actually is available that moves you more towards maybe sound engineering, adding sounds, adding other things maybe, that does it feel like less and less of a performance and more of a like a tech position than it used to be? And like I don't even know how to articulate this question, but do you feel like music in general is moving in a positive direction as a musician, or not? Oh gosh, that wasn't super clear. Did I get the message across without using English correctly?
Definitely. Yeah. So the line between sound designer and composer is definitely becoming more blurred nowadays. And that's one thing that, if you want to adapt and be able to work on a huge variety of projects, you need to learn how to do that, how to kind of work between those two worlds, and not really take it too personally that maybe the director doesn't want something so musical as they want something that just kind of has an ambiance or something. So that's just something to get used to. I wouldn't say that music in general as a whole is necessarily going that way, because music is all over the place. But as far as like film scores go, and less so in video games, I think the art of melody is still well and alive in many video games. But of course, it depends on the genre. But yeah, it's definitely, I totally understand what you're getting at.
Well, yeah, what I'm saying is like all the growth is in those places, video games, podcasts, all these opportunities to do things and create. Whereas the traditional roles that the positions musicians have had are shrinking. The number of orchestras and positions in them is going down. The amount of live music in general that gets hired is is I feel like less and less and more free than it ever was. And so
Absolutely.
to be a professional, it's not as straightforward as it used to be. I like playing music. I like writing music. I'll just have a band and go get paid to play at dinner theaters and all sorts of things that don't exist anymore. So it it sounds like you as an individual in the modern age, you are doing 5 different jobs that used to be that is now just one. And it used to be 5.
Totally. And I can speak to a couple things here. One thing you mentioned earlier that struck a chord with me, no pun intended, is the technical versus the artistic side of things. And you may be interested to know that I view a lot of my work in film and games, just in multimedia composing, as more technical than I do artistic, because I'm serving the vision, the director's vision or the designer's vision, and I need to create an environment, a sound environment, or what have you, that meets certain requirements. And to do that, I use certain musical devices. There is artistry in there, definitely, to be sure, but I I take a very kind of technical approach to fulfilling that. And um, if you get too hung up on the artistry side of things, it may actually slow you down, and you might end up getting frustrated on why you can't express yourself so much here. And the other side of that question you just posed, actually, it wasn't a question, but anyway, to be a musician today, any kind of musician, if you're involved in that field as far as composing or just performing, you do have to be really creative, because since the creation of sample libraries, it's less necessary to record live musicians for your scores. And sample libraries, they sound better every year, higher and higher quality. And these sample libraries are obviously being recorded by musicians. So that is one way, depending on who you are as a musician. If you're okay with that, not everyone is. Not every musician really approves of recording sample libraries, but that is a valid line of work. So you can add that to your repertoire. And um, live gigs, of course, I think those will be a thing for a very long time. But you just have to kind of pull together a wider variety of kind of career opportunities.
So
To,
if you were to
yeah.
take if you were to take that same type of comment and speak to your 18-year-old self who's in college right now, what would you say to them? Like, what have you learned, and what do you see about the current and future state that you would give them advice about? Like, or those students at USC, what would you suggest they look into or do?
In college, I was a little bit more set on maybe one or two options. And I think I was a little bit too close minded about what career opportunities that I would be willing to take. And even like at the time, I don't think I saw myself even teaching piano lessons after I graduated college, but that's that's a very regular thing that I've been involved in, but that I'm doing in addition to other things. So I think in general, for me or for whoever is getting ready to enter the workforce as a musician, just be open to lots of different ways to enhance your career, be creative, like the creative person that you are, but also try to come up with new ways that nobody's come up with before. Create like a niche for yourself. People do that all the time, and you can open up your own opportunities by having that kind of approach, rather than taking a look at only available fields that are out there and saying, I'm gonna do that. There's a lot more to it than that.
So I like that advice Alex just shared. I've heard similar things from you. You're an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Is it the same advice in two totally different fields?
What, in terms of like being more open to how you monetize your skills?
Yeah.
Um, yes and no. I don't think it applies to all entrepreneurs. If you're a more service oriented entrepreneur, then yeah, it does apply. But if you are making, like you're trying to build like a physical product, then it's a little bit of a different story. But I generally think though the idea that is applicable both ways is you have to figure out what the demand is for your product before you go out and for service before you go out and make it or have all this stuff ready to go. Like,
Well, I think music is great because there is some investment involved in getting good gear, but you can
yeah, but
test the waters in anything after that for almost just your time.
yeah, but you need to know what kind of music people want or what people want you to do with your musical ability. Like if you want to start just like a, I don't know, a not an 1820s style Indian sitar band and there's no demand for it, then you're not going to get any gigs.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is you can test the water for basically just your time.
Yeah, I mean,
If you
Once
have
you
the
make that initial
instruments,
purchase.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
yeah. I have to give a lot of credit though to people in music who actually find and the arts who find a way to make a living for it. Like my cousin Peter Pardini is a director in Hollywood, and he came from a non-traditional background for Hollywood and has been able to make a little niche for himself. Because
Way
it
to
seems,
name drop a family member on the podcast, Nick.
well, he was one of our first guests,
I
so
know, I know, I know.
old
I'm just
listeners
I'm
will
just
know
giving you a
Peter
hard time,
well.
man.
But uh, yeah, so with that, the point I'm trying to make is that there's a lot of these people who want to be like directors or actors or musicians. They're kind of like the equivalent of creative entrepreneurs, like the guy who creates a business card in LLC but never has any revenue.
Did you use
Yeah,
the word entrepreneur?
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know,
I've never heard
there's the
that.
artist that hurts everybody else's reputation that lives at home and never does anything and says he's an artist.
Or just or his parents pay his rent in New York, or he's a barista pretending to be an artist who's maybe written one page of his great American novel in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
But there's also people who go around saying, "Oh, I've got an app,"
Oh yeah,
and other types of entrepreneurs.
that's
They're a terrible breed.
yeah. I mean,
But sometimes you might feel like that no matter what if you are a real entrepreneur and you're having just a moment of failure like that might be something you
I
feel.
felt like that with my first business, and sometimes I feel that way today if I'm not growing at the pace I expect to.
Right.
But the difference is I've actually been able to generate free cash flow, so that's why I don't feel like I am an entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's a tough world to make it in, and my hats off to both you guys for being successful so far, and I hope you're successful going into the future too.
Here's hoping.
I know markets are crazy this year, Hollywood's crazy this year. I'm in aerospace and nobody's flying on airplanes, and that's a problem.
Sure.
It's definitely, who thought that like 2020 vision was going to be such a like wonderful ironic thing for the end of this year. Like
I
20 like 2020 hindsight basically is going to be everybody's wrap up in December. Like we should have done this, we should have done that. Who knew?
I just call it clown world. It's the state of where we're in right now.
Clown world.
That's very frightening because most clowns are frightening.
Well, it should be a little frightening when the normal laws of societal and economic gravity are completely decoupled.
Which is probably why Alex started his podcast, and I don't want to end this show without giving him a moment to discuss this little hobby that may turn into, the next Joe Rogan, and we can say he was on our podcast first, right? So, Alex, you and your friends have started a show. Tell our listeners what it is, why you're doing it. What do you think the future of the show is going to be like, and why they should listen?
Sure. So This is the brainchild of my roommate, Tony Rosenthal, who you will hear on the beginning of every show. He's the main producer and main host, but I am a regular host on that show as well. It is called LA Survival Guide, as we mentioned earlier. And there's four of us. It's us as roommates and then two of our friends. We're basically just four LA millennials, and we just talk about things that are happening in LA and our opinions on things and just our take on the culture. And lately, at the end of our first season, which we just wrapped up, we started doing some extra episodes commenting on the events surrounding COVID and how people have had to adjust, how people have had to make changes based on that and depending on their career. And we are planning to do a second season coming probably either late this year or the beginning of next year. I'm not sure exactly when, but more to come. And you can find us on Instagram. We have a website as well. And I got started in it. Actually, there was going to be the four roles were actually already filled before I got involved. And initially, I was not going to be a regular host, but then somebody dropped out, and I kind of took that position. And it was a bonus that I also can do the audio engineering part. And I did write the theme song to that podcast as well. So it was a fun way to kind of get involved and try something completely new. Honestly, I'd never done a podcast before, and it's a totally different skill set than writing music. And it was a little bit bumpy at first, but we sort of got into a flow, and now we kind of, I think we're getting the hang of it. I guess there's a lot more to learn, of course, as you go, but it's kind of a mix between things I'm comfortable with and things that are outside my comfort zone. But it's been interesting so far. Definitely informative.
Well, I'll be the first fan to say that I am very impressed with your audio and the production that you have, as well as the fact that you have four hosts and you have a flowing conversation, which is extremely difficult to do. Nick and I can hardly do it when it's just him and I, and then you add a guest in, and there's three of us, and we're constantly talking over each other. And part of that is our social skills. Mine is very limited, so I'm very impressed by the production value that you guys have in that show, and the content is perfect for anybody who's a millennial, meaning they are like double income, no kids, or you're a single guy or girl trying to make it in the world right now, living outside of your parents' house, especially if you want to know what it's like in LA. The answer is mostly that it's crazy, but hey, you want more details, listen to the show. And and I really appreciate you coming on the show, Alex. I would be happy to share on our show notes page anything and everything connected to you that you'd like to share with our listeners, especially that Instagram for your podcast, since that's a counterintuitive thing for your podcast to have. I'm sure everyone wants to see what you post. Maybe it's like live action. I guess I'm just going to put it on the show notes page, and everybody's going to have to go there right now and find out for themselves.
Yep,
But
you'll just have to see for yourself.
yeah, and Nick, is there anything you wanted to say before we close out?
No, just if you want to follow us, you can find us at Twitter at Nothing Exempt, or you can email us at Nick or Brian at nothingexempt.com.
Yeah, absolutely. And feel free to tweet at Nick in the middle of the night, or like 4 a.m. East Coast time, so that he can't sleep when he's got to be up early to start trading the markets. That's probably the best for him. But thank you, everybody. This has been Nothing Exempt. We'll talk to you soon.